So, too, I would be remiss if I did not conclude by saying a few words about what is probably a more critical issue than the issue of how we intervene in particular companies in time of crisis. This is the agenda of crisis prevention through stronger regulation. Many in this room, like me, have devoted in one way or another a significant part of their energies to the financial sector. In the last generation, we have seen in the financial sector the Latin American debt crisis, the 1987 stock market crash, the commercial real estate collapse and the S&L debacle, the Mexican financial crisis, the Asian financial crisis, the LTCM liquidity crisis, the bursting of the NASDAQ bubble, and Enron, all of that before the events of the last 2 years. That works out to something a bit over one major crisis every 3 years. Now, in the textbooks, we teach that the financial system is a distributor of risk, is a bearer of risk. We do not teach that it is a creator of risk. And yet, every 3 years for a generation, and dramatically in the last 2 years, problems emanating from the financial sector have profoundly disrupted the lives of, in the least serious cases, hundreds of thousands of people, and in the most serious cases, tens of millions of people. Surely our fellow citizens are right to demand of those of us involved with the financial system greater stability and safety. That is why President Obama has made financial regulatory reform a central legislative priority of this early phase of his administration. That is why considerations of stability, safety, and systemic risk have to loom larger in the planning, thinking, and strategizing of every financial institution going forward than they have in the past. While the details in this area are mind-numbingly complex, some of the principles should be relatively obvious. Any financial institution that is big enough, interconnected enough, or risky enough that its distress necessitates government writing substantial checks is big enough, risky enough, or interconnected enough that it should be some part of the government's responsibility to supervise it on a comprehensive basis. We need regulators whose job it is to perform what might be called the free safety function, looking for the threats not covered by existing and previous regulation in the systemic area. I think, for example, of the explosive growth of over-the-counter derivatives on a largely unregulated basis over the last several years, and the failure to monitor those markets. I would suggest to you that our financial system is not fail-safe until it is safe for failure. We have resolution regimes for banks. We do not have systems for resolving non-banks or even bank holding companies, and that is a large gap. Perhaps even more fundamentally, I would venture this generalization. There has never been, and see, this is what happens when you're in the government. What I wrote and what I said was there has never been a financial crisis in which leverage was not centrally involved. And someone looking out for me has modified the sentence here to say there has virtually never been a financial crisis in which leverage was not centrally involved. Archimedes famously observed that if you give him a long enough lever, he could move the earth. We have seen powerfully demonstrated in financial markets that if you give enough leverage, people can lose an arbitrarily large amount of their own money and that of their clients. As Secretary Geithner once said when he was asked what's most important for financial stability, the three most important things are capital, capital, and capital. Looking forward, we intend to address capital adequacy as a central element of systemic reform. Finally, there are some common sense points about the structure of regulation as well. Can it surprise anyone that if institutions choose their regulators and regulators compete for jurisdiction, that standards fall and that there's a race to the bottom? Instead of sponsoring races to the bottom, we need to drive competition to the top by insisting on strong standards. Corollary of the same idea that regulators should not compete for institutions is the idea that regulation of consumer issues must put the interests of consumers above the interests of regulated financial institutions. Monitoring systemic risk, implementing resolution authority, ensuring capital adequacy, eliminating regulatory arbitrage, enhancing financial protections. If we can reform our financial system, we will minimize the recurrence of the situation we all find ourselves in today. Now, there's a debate, and there are two sides of it. There are people who believe that the wrong time to reorganize the fire department is while the fire may still be burning. And those people believe that this is not the right time to debate the future of the financial regulatory system, that debate should wait until this crisis is behind us. The President has concluded very strongly that that view is wrong. He's reached that conclusion for two reasons. The first is experience teaches that once the crisis has passed, the will to reform will pass as well. The second is that if we are to bring about recovery as rapidly as possible, the way in which we will bring about that recovery is through increased confidence and a sense that the system is better controlled, less prone to bubbles and excessive leverage in the future than in the past, will be a contributor to the creation of that kind of confidence. I'm often asked how I would define our objectives in the economic area. Here's the answer that I've learned to give. My daughters last year in high school studied U.S. history. It's interesting for somebody my age to observe what they do and do not learn. 1982 recession, not mentioned. 1975 recession, not mentioned. Any economic fluctuation in my lifetime, not mentioned. The Great Depression, 6 weeks of study. Our objective, to make sure that when people study history in 2040, they don't learn about how the economy was performing in 2008 and 2009. But, and this really is my final point, what they did learn about a whole set of laws that were passed in the 1930s that saved the market from its own excesses. They learned about a whole set of laws that were passed actually by both Roosevelts that responded to the excesses of the market system and enabled the market system to evolve and function better going forwards. And that is what I hope students will be studying a generation from now when they study this period as we manage this crisis and we set the stage for a healthier, even better functioning market system in the future. Thank you very much.